Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Open Mic, episode 101. Hopefully you've seen episode 100. I'm very proud of it. We brought back some past guests, some past exonerees, and it was just a lot of fun. Right now I'm shooting from Phoenix, Arizona, right off Camelback Mountain, where I'm taking a hike later today. Excited for our 101st guest. Robert Riggs is a top investigative journalist in our country. He's the host of a podcast called True Crime Reporters. In his series Free to Kill, he exposes corruption in the parole board system. And if you're a fan of Open Mic, you know we talk a lot about parole. Parole boards often let out vicious killers who go on to commit new crimes while refusing to parole the wrongfully convicted because they don't admit to their crimes and show remorse. And we've had people on our show who has talked about not admitting guilt because they didn't want to lie. They'd rather stay in prison for a crime they didn't commit, which is crazy.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That's what you're going to hear on my podcast, Open Mic. I'm going to tell you things that most lawyers won't tell you. We expose the truth and bring you justice. I want you to go for the win in law and in life.
You want an honest man, but you don't understand. I won't be here
Well, thanks for having me on, and congratulations on getting to 101. That's tough to do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Robert is one of the country's top investigative reporters. You've been on CBS Evening News, CBS 60 Minutes, ABC Nightline, as well as local stations. Tell me about some of the hot stories you broke or covered as an investigative reporter.
Well, the first season of True Crime Reporter is a series called Free to Kill. It's actually now going to be made into a 5-part docudrama on a major streaming channel. And it focuses on the worst serial killer in Texas history, who had been on death row. His sentence was commuted to life in 1972, but who would have imagined that, he was eligible for parole, but who would imagine what happened? Well, it happened. And there were two converging points of corruption in this state. There was political corruption, in which both the Democrats and the Republicans had always talked tough on crime. They ran on crime, but they didn't spend money to build prisons to hold particularly violent inmates. And we had a prison overcrowding problem. And the system was about to be taken over by a federal judge. So they secretly began releasing 150 inmates a day. And finally, they ran out of hot check writers, and they got into the worst of the worst. And in the context of all that, the chairman of the board and others decided they could make money off of this, and they started selling paroles. And Kenneth McDuff walks out of prison, a serial killer, and literally resumes his killing spree the next day. It goes on for 2.5 years.
Holy cow. So, I mentioned in the open that we've talked about parole. But what did you've done investigative reporting on this, on Free to Kill. What did you uncover about, parole boards, and give me some insight, because we haven't really had an insider to talk about parole.
Well, here, the parole board is appointed by the governor. It's a political appointment. And at the time that I did these investigations, it was a political plum. People got on there. They had no knowledge of criminal justice, sociology, nothing. They just bring in what they think is their common sense. Now, the other thing is that that movie image that the inmate comes down and sits down before the board, and they have this logical set of questioning and stuff. Well, in Texas, that's a myth. We found that maybe one of 3 members, there would be 3 deciding, one of 3 might talk to the inmate, but typically they just passed a file around and looked at the file. And there was the thing I thought was really broken. There was really no matrix to assess, is this person a future risk to society? Have they improved their life while they've been in the prison? And in the case of McDuff, um, we found that, the parole board people had described him as a model prisoner. When I got his file, which was leaked to me, his prison files, he was anything but that. He's a big troublemaker in prison. Had associations with the Aryan Brotherhood. You even internal parole officers said he was a ticking time bomb. So, I still think the parole system around the state is broke. I mean, there needs to be, I think, highly trained and procedures and a matter of analysis, because there are people that should get out, but I haven't seen any scientifically based method to assess everyone.
That's really interesting. When you said the movies, the first movie that came to me was Shawshank Redemption, because that had a couple of good parole board scenes. And I mean, I've seen that movie a million times, and that just sticks in my head. And they are looking for you. I mean, like in the movies, and is this, they want people to admit their guilt, take responsibility. It feels like that's the only litmus test to whether or not they're going to get out. If somebody is innocent and they keep proclaiming their innocence, there's no way they're going to get paroled. I mean, do you think that's true?
I do. In the case of McDuff, some of the members there, this went through different panels. They didn't even open his file. They didn't even. They just rubber stamped what the other members were doing. Now there was corruption in play, but they basically look. Well, this member that looked at the file, maybe talked to him. They're opposed. I'm going to oppose or vote for them. So, but what we see in the movies, it's a big, big myth.
It sounds it. So, we cover a lot of wrongful conviction stuff here on Open Mic. And, we've heard predictions of thousands to tens of thousands of innocent people being locked up. Some of the people that we've interviewed, they got a break because an investigative journalist like yourself wrote a story about it. What's your sense? Do you think that there is enough journalists covering these type of wrongful convictions or potentially wrongful convictions to expose this tragic injustice?
No, journalism has been gutted. And it started back in 2008 with the recession. And I was at CBS then. And, there was a day in March 2008 that literally hundreds of correspondents, reporters, producers, you name it, camera people, editors were fired, were turned loose. And at all the networks, all the major stations across the country, I was on the top of the list because I did investigative reporting. And the big media companies, especially today, they do not like true investigative reporting. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and you might get sued. And so I'd have counsels tell me that, well, Robert, you may have it right. We know you got all the facts, but we don't want to spend money defending this. So they just don't want to do it. And with the stresses on the organizations now with, it's the internet, they don't have the revenue. It's pretty thin, very, very thin. And the other thing that's happened is that, the news business has taken sides about opinion, and it's either right or left. And I don't really ever see much in the center anymore. It really is up to people like you and independent projects to shine the light on this stuff. And you need to bring it to a reporter or the media on a silver platter for them to do it. It's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah,
and that covers, wars and you name it. For instance, I was an embedded reporter in Iraq during the invasion in 2003. I don't think many of these news organizations even do that much anymore because of the expense.
It is sad. I never really looked back at it to 2008, but it makes complete sense what you just said. Um, one story that is a national story that I think should be a national story that sounds like nobody's ever going to run it, but it's case after case that we cover. It comes down to a bad court-appointed attorney who pushes deals on innocent clients because they have too many cases, or they're just running around. They don't have enough time to do all the work. And it feels like it's a national story, but I think you just answered the question why we're never going to see a big story about this.
That story would require a lot of footwork. Just to, if you're doing it in this county alone, you're going to have to do a lot of data investigation, collecting data and everything, and lots of interviews. I mean, it's a team project. In the old days, and early on, I was a member of something called the Investigative Reporters and Editors, IRE. It's still in existence, but in the old days, you had these crack investigative teams. Like I knew reporters at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they took on these big team investigations. It's all been gutted. It's gone. But it would certainly be needed. And listen, any reporter worth their salt that's around the courthouse, they can get a sense of this, that these are not the tip-top counsels. I mean, almost, I always kind of had a feeling, it was distasteful to me in some sense, that there was just a gravy train going on with some of these court-appointed attorneys. Do you know what I'm talking about?
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't gotten the sense as it's greed, but these are just, a lot of them are just bottom of the barrel lawyers who have, and they're making $500 for a murder trial, and they need to do 20 murder trials a month to pay their bills. And they don't have time to do a cross-examination, let alone research the trial, let alone find an expert witness. And it just makes me want to vomit. And I know there's a lot of good court-appointed attorneys, and I know there's a lot of good, attorneys who do this type of work. But when it gets down to a wrongful conviction, and you look back, I think 1 out of the 20 people I've talked to said they had a good defense attorney, and the rest were, this guy phoned it in. I never met him before the trial. He didn't call a witness. I had 8 alibi witnesses. He didn't call it. And as a lawyer, I'm like, why didn't you stand up and start yelling? Get the judge's attention. But these are mostly uneducated people. They don't have any money. It's just a huge, vicious cycle, sad state of affairs. And
well, I almost, you get the feeling it's like this factory, and it doesn't work very well. I also think it's contributing to the backlog of inmates in jails, and we've had, quote, bail reform going on, but some of that's turning into disaster, especially in this state, because there's not some common sense going on. But they're trying, there's suits, and they're trying to relieve the backlog of the jail. There are people who are spending way too long in jail. We need to be selective about, who is a threat to society. They don't do a good job of that. But I think part of that goes back to the court-appointed counsels, and not just an inefficiency in the system.
I agree. Have you ever sat through a trial or covered a trial where you've heard about so-called scientific evidence on bite marks or shaken baby syndrome, or even arson cases that just didn't make sense?
No, I don't recall any, but some of the ones I covered was pretty, they were serial killers and stuff like that. It was it's pretty obvious. But I've spent a lot of time. I've probably been in every maximum security prison in Texas, and there's always an inmate going to try to tell you their story. And of course, unfortunately, everybody says they're innocent, but you do hear those cases, and you're like, wow, how they end up in here, or is this really appropriate, or the sentence seemed onerous? Many years ago, I got an award for excellence in reporting for the Dallas Crime Commission, and the room is full of the FBI and DAs and all this, and judges. And I started off by saying, well, I've been in every state prison. Let me tell you something. Our state prison system is a monument to failure in this state. Well, the whole room flinched, like we're going to take the award back. But I came to believe that we're in there. I thought it was disproportionately minority population, uneducated. I felt that somehow the education system is failing, societal problems. I mean, it's a microcosm of problems in our society.
As we're talking about reporting, what we see in a lot of our cases here in Michigan are that the police and prosecutors are lying. They hide exculpatory evidence to get convictions, this crazy tunnel vision. And I'm reading these, and I'm talking to these people, and I'm hearing about these stories, and I'm like, why hasn't somebody covered this? Why isn't the media all over this? You might have already answered my question that it's budget cuts, but it just seems, it's just mind blowing to me that the public doesn't know what's happening.
Well, and the way things are looked at today is unfortunately, many organizations look at it, is it click worthy? Is it going to get clicks? I can see them kind of getting in the mode of, well, we've done those stories, move on. Let's do another subject. We're tired of that. But however, we are in the age of the internet where you can be your own advocate, own reporter for issues. And to me, that's the solution. It has to be some independently funded organization to do this. I do not see the mainstream media of what we've known. I do not see them doing it.
Which is a problem because, like I said earlier, some of these people got out of prison because of reporters. Yeah. And this is probably before 2008.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. I'm a member of a group here that was set up after 9/11 across the country called InfraGard. It's a partnership with the FBI and people in business, the business world, to have a line of communication about protecting infrastructure. And you get a background check and all, but you can also get briefings and talks. And so the chief judge of the Northern District of Texas came to speak, and she sees me in the audience. And, I'm out doing my own now. And she says, "Riggs, where the heck have you been? Where are you?" And she then begins to rail about how the federal court system is no longer covered by the media in Dallas. And she starts ticking off big stories in business, drug dealing, immigration, all kinds of issues, huge issues affecting the city. No one is there. And, she even noted that, a recent case, big case, that the reporter had come for the morning testimony and left and never came back and wrote a story. And the afternoon testimony completely changed what had happened in the morning. So there's just a blind spot now for criminal justice across the board.
Wow. That's really interesting. Never thought about the judges. Some of them want the coverage, need the coverage. So tell us, on True Crime Reporter, you started talking a little bit about this 5-part series, but tell, if people tune in, what kind, tell us about one of the crazy cases that you've covered on that.
Well, okay, so we're working on a follow-up series now called Don't Fence Me In. It's about notorious prison breaks in Texas and fugitives. And I focus on I covered this back and I've kind of followed up to the now. He worked at a grocery store stalker, and had tried to move up in management, and just frustrated, got fired. So he just decided to hold the place up like an armored guard and stuff, and did a number of these robberies, gets caught, escapes while going to trial, and is later caught again. And boy, they dropped the hammer on him, 80-year prison sentence. He gets to Texas, in a Texas prison now. And after 4 years, well, here's what's really interesting. During the George Bush campaign on inauguration night, Bush talks tough on crime. And the inmate writes his mom a letter saying, "I have no hope of parole. I'm gonna break out." And he's a smart guy. You almost end up rooting for him. He's so smart and bright, but he shuts off the power to the prison during Thanksgiving when they're on a skeleton staff and escapes, and comes back to Dallas, robs some of the same grocery stores he had robbed before, and really starts snubbing his nose at the FBI, so much to the point it was embarrassment for the FBI. They had teams out everywhere staking out grocery stores trying to get this guy. Never got him, but finally, two fugitive hunters from the prison system, they track him down, bring him back. He almost escapes again.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I mean I called him the Energizer Bunny. And
What years were this, Robert?
that starts in when is that? 95 or so, and I take it up to today. And what ended up happening is that they put him into solitary confinement, which is administrative segregation here, in a supermax unit. And as one of the investigators said, he's so far back in the prison system, you'd have to feed him with a slingshot. And there he is. And I mean, he's in his 50s and gray and still there, but he was always saying, swearing, I'm going to get out. Now, Texas is interesting. They'll spend $1 million on escape. Their philosophy here is that if we let one get away, they'll all be going over the walls. So, boy, they put it out. Their whole thing is we don't want to ever be known for having an inmate on the ground anywhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a TV movie waiting to happen, or a regular movie waiting to happen.
Yeah. And today we're working on the second part of this series, and it is about a woman in 1955 in Pasadena, Texas, south of Houston, murdered her 8 and 9-year-old sons, but she dismembered their bodies.
What?
And it's a sad story. It's bizarre. She was represented by the great Percy Foreman. I'm sure you know Percy's reputation, never lost a case.
Yeah.
And he pled her out. I mean, he knew he had no chase. This thing was nationwide headlines. And she gets a life sentence. The prosecutor tells the press afterwards, she won't be eligible for parole in 34 years. Well, the Texas Parole Board, they let her out 25 years later. And after she goes to a halfway house and absconds and disappears for 16 years. It appeared, she goes off to Idaho, meets a guy, a widower, and it appears that she probably killed him and takes over his Social Security fraud over his benefits. And I've got a fugitive task force member from the FBI who tracked her down, and they brought her back to prison age 75. And then about 3 years later, she had failing health, was legally blind. They released her on parole, and then she died at age 90 in 2012 in a nursing home located near one of the women's units. But it is a case of twists and turns that are amazing. And, we've got her confession. And you're always, you just sit there and you hear these things, especially with children. You're like, what in the world was going on in this woman's mind, or it happened in you're always wondering, is it nature or nurture? So, yeah.
How the heck did they let this woman out ever for such a heinous crime? I know. I'm just shocked.
I know exactly what you're talking about. You just sit here and you shake your head over it. Now, and one of the problems here is that the parole files and the prison files are secret. It's against the law to make them public. And so in my case, the way I was able to break open so many of my stories about the corruption, I developed some sources and they started leaking them to me at their own legal risk. And, I think these case files would reveal flaws in the cases and prosecutions as well if you really dug into them.
I can't wait to hear these podcasts. Tell me and my viewers and listeners how we can find them.
We're on all of your favorite podcast apps, True Crime Reporter. I've got coming in to join me a former federal prosecutor who he prosecuted the Branch Davidians, the case. He's done terrorist and everything. And he is actually, we kind of reunited. He's in this first series about Kenneth McDuff because he was a young federal prosecutor, and no one, McDuff was this suspect and what have you, but no one really got out there and after it. And one of the sad things is that McDuff, like serial killers are prone to do, had been preying on sex workers that worked certain streets. And these poor women were all meth addicts at the time. And he had come up on the radar screen with police, and they just kind of wrote it off as that, it's sex workers, who cares? And there's that attitude out there. But this prosecutor had a different attitude, and it was interesting. He got the U.S. Marshal Service to come in, and he got one of the major task force leaders who was considered their best fugitive hunter in the world. If they needed somebody overseas to come back, he's the guy that went. For instance, he went with the Airborne Rangers when they went in on Noriega. He had the most interesting comment. We talked about this, and he said, working this case, I heard that the police just sort of ignored this. But he said, let me tell you the way I looked at this, and I had my team look at it. Citizens and these women, they're sheep. They are sheep. And we're the sheep dogs, and we should be protecting them. And they're somebody's daughter. I don't care, what walk of life, what ethnicity. They are someone's daughter, and they don't have a right for this to happen to them. We're the sheep dogs. I had the greatest respect for them after that.
I love that. Well, on that note, Robert, a Peabody Award-winning investigative reporter, really love having you on the show. I love hearing these stories. They're mind-blowing to me. We're going to go and check out your podcast. I'm going to go check it out today, and I hope everybody else does. And just thanks for being on Open Mic, and thanks for doing what you do and keep exposing all this crazy stuff out there.
Well, thanks for what you do. And what struck me is, I see these cases where they're kind of rubber stamp releases, and then it's, it's like moving a mountain when you've got evidence of innocence.
That's a different topic. And yes, it is. And it's really difficult. And if I had great reporters like you helping me on every one of these cases, we'd get a lot more people out of prison who didn't commit the crime. I know it. And there's some people here in Michigan, Bill Proctor and others, who are investigative journalists who are helping, but it's an epidemic, and at least in Michigan, and I'm now learning in many, many other states. No states are spared by this, and it's sad, and we need to investigate, because these people don't have the funds. They don't have the know how to do it. It's not easy.
And they don't have the sophistication to question and ask the right questions. They're not coming from certainly the educational backgrounds that you and I are.
That's a major problem and similarity. You're absolutely right, Robert. You're absolutely right. All right. Well, thank you again. And
thank you so much.
Talk to you again soon.
Enjoy that hike today.
I will.
All
Thank
right.
you. I am literally going to subscribe to that podcast right now. Those stories that he was saying, I can't believe there aren't movies about every single one of them. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Like it, share it, comment, tell us what else you want to hear, and we will bring it to you here on Open Mic. That was episode 101. Can't believe we are over 100. But thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing the episodes as you do, and I'll see you next time.